Now your Bibles are open to Ecclesiastes chapter number 4, and now we've made it down to verse number 9. On the program yesterday, we enjoyed a vintage broadcast of my late grandfather, and I'm positive that was a blessing. We're right back now in the harness and right here in Ecclesiastes 4 and verse number 9. Solomon was speaking yesterday about the futility of one being alone and the difficulty of one being alone. I can't think of anything any more tragic than one being by themselves. There is one alone, and there is not a second, yea, he hath neither child nor brother, yet is there no end of all his labor, neither is his eye satisfied with riches, neither saith he, for whom do I labor and bereave my soul of good? This is also vanity, yea, it is a sore travail. And I've dealt with that on the program a couple of days ago, and I'm not going to spend a great deal of time belaboring that on the broadcast today. The futility of a man laboring all of his life and having no offspring to leave the accumulation of his goods to leave the inheritance to, no children to have a good inheritance, no wife to share all of the abundance that he may have accumulated, no children to share in that, no grandchildren to share in that. That's a very sad and a tragic thing. That statement, there is one alone, leads us to Solomon's conclusion in verse number 9. Two are better than one. Verse 8, there is one alone. What a tragedy that is. How tragic that is for a man to be destitute of wife, to be destitute of children, to be destitute of brothers and sisters, to be destitute of children and grandchildren and offspring. There is one alone. But by comparison, two are better than one. Now that's always the case. Two are better than one. Then Solomon begins to explain why two are better than one. Two are better than one, number one, because they have a good reward for their labor. Number two, for if they fall, the one will lift up his fellow. Then there is a warning given, but woe to him that is alone when he falleth, for he hath not another to help him up. Three, again, if two lie together, they have heat. But how can one be warm alone? Four, if one prevail against him, two shall withstand him, and a threefold cord is not quickly broken. Then verse 13 begins another line of thought. Better is a poor and a wise child than an old and foolish king who will no more be admonished. Now, having read that, let's go back in the time that I have on the program today and see how two are better than one. Again, we see the tragedy of a man being alone, a woman being alone, not having one. There is one alone, how tragic that is. And then by comparison, two are better than one. That is always the case. Two are better than one because, number one, they have a good reward for their labor. I appreciate my dear wife. Now, my wife taught school for about 20 years, and when I married her, she worked in the hospital system, and she has done secretarial work and an office and things of that nature. But now my wife is retired. She's a stay-at-home grandmother and a stay-at-home wife, and I wouldn't have it any other way. But two are better than one because they have a good reward for their labor. In the early days of our marriage, I didn't make enough money. I was on the staff at Tabernacle, and I'm not complaining. God forbid, I'm making an observation, but I'm certainly not complaining. I didn't make enough money while I was on the staff there to buy a house, to pay the utilities and the running expense of the house, and to buy groceries to eat and put gasoline in the automobile to drive. I didn't make enough money. If we had of necessity lived on my salary, we would have never made it. We couldn't have bought a house. I mean, that would have been out. The house payment, between the house payment and the running expenses, the utility bills, it wiped me out. Now, if I had not had my wife, and if my wife had not worked at that time, I would have never been able to have bought that house. We paid that house off. That house is now in my wife's name. My wife rents that house out and enjoys the income that that house produces now. Two are better than one. Number one, because they have a good reward for their labor. I discovered very quickly when I married my wife that I had almost doubled my energy and my effort, because I had the labor, the investment of my labor, my work, but then I coupled that with the investment and the labor of my wife's work. My wife being in the home and taking care of domestic duties freed me to be able to continue in my work and to continue in my labor. I mean, before my wife and I married, I washed my clothes, I ironed my shirts, I made my bed, I changed the bed, I did all the domestic duties until I married my wife, and it takes time to do that. It takes time to go grocery shopping. It takes time to clean the house and dust and run a vacuum cleaner and run a washing machine, things of that nature. But when I married my wife and my wife took over the domestic duties of the home, it freed me to be able to invest in other labor and more labor. Because, so the two of us pooling our energy together and pooling our resources together doubled my output. It doubled my output because I now had the output and the energy of my wife. They have a good reward because for their labor. Secondly, for if they fall, the one will lift up his fellow. Now, in the course of life, you and I are going to be faced with all kind of difficulties. And you'll never be free, as long as you live in this world, you'll never be free from disappointments and disruptions and heartaches and difficult circumstances. You'll never get over that or get past that. And it's always good to have somebody that is in your corner. I mean, somebody that is for you. On occasion in the course of my life, and I'm not telling you anything that's any different than the case of your life, sometimes we have that little jingle in the South, nobody loves me, everybody hates me, I'm going to the garden to eat worms. I don't remember the first time I heard that in the course of my life. And you feel like everything is against you. And it's always good to have people that are in your corner. My children have been a great source of encouragement to me. And my wife has been a constant source of encouragement and a constant asset to me, an encourager in the course of my life. If they fall, the one will lift up his fellow. When my wife is discouraged and despondent, I can encourage her and help her. And when I am discouraged and despondent, my wife can help me and encourage me. But woe to him that is alone when he falleth, for he hath not another to help him. There's sometimes that I come dragging through the front door. My wife knows immediately when I walk through the door what kind of day it's been. And she'll begin to inquire and try to encourage and try to help. My children are a source of great encouragement. You can have a terrible day, I mean just a rotten day, and get home and have your little grandchildren there in the home, and all of that immediately goes away. It just all disappears and dissolves into pixie dust and into vapor and goes away when you look down in the face of those little grandchildren looking back up at you, and they'll encourage your heart. But woe to him that is alone when he falleth, for he hath not another to help him up. And everybody needs help. Everybody needs to be helped up. Everybody's going to get knocked down from time to time. On occasion, sometimes people have the idea that preachers don't need encouragement and that preachers don't have feelings, but they do. And sometimes they get the idea that men don't have feelings, but they do. And all of us from time to time need a word of encouragement. A compliment goes a long way. A source of encouragement and help goes an awful long way. Then number three, again, if two lie together, then they have heat. And married folk know something about that. My wife and I have been married for 36 years. We're now working in 37 years. We have shared a bed our whole marriage. I intend to share a bed with my wife until I die. And I don't ever plan to sleep in a separate room from her or in a separate bed. And on cold nights, it's nice to have my wife at my side. If two lie together, then they have heat. But how can one be warm alone? What a tragedy that would be for a man to be destitute in Antarctica or in the Arctic during the wintertime, or to be exiled somewhere and in the cold, bitter wintertime, and to have no one there to help him. And if two lie together, then they have heat. Then in verse number 12 again, and if one prevail against him, two shall withstand him. You know, we have the saying in our vernacular that blood is thicker than water. It certainly is. And it's good for you and me to recognize our position as not being a part of other people's family, and then to recognize our wonderful position in our family where we have our kinfolk. Now, if you want to get a battle started, you say something critical about my family, and if I'm going to disagree with my family, we'll disagree in private. I don't need your input on that. And if you're disagreeing with your family, you don't need my input in that. I need to keep my mouth shut and stay out of your business and let you deal with your family circumstance as you see fit, and I'll deal with my family circumstance as I see fit. If you want to stir up a hornet's nest, you begin to criticize some children's parents, or a wife to a husband, or a husband to a wife, or a grandfather to a grandchild, and you'll have a war on your hands. You'll have a young war on your hands before you know what you've done. If one prevail against him, two shall withstand him. And I've been blessed over the years at the times that I've run into difficult circumstances with people, and to see my children step forward. Years ago, I had some of my students that I taught, I taught school for 9 years in another lifetime now, a long time ago. And I had some of my students rally in a circumstance, and students that I had not seen in 20 years, and spoke up and said, Dr. Carper taught me in school, and he's a good man, and they came to my defense. If one prevail against him, two shall withstand him, and a threefold cord is not quickly broken. And I think that threefold cord is probably to be associated with children and grandchildren. I'll say something about this on the broadcast tomorrow. God bless you until then.
You may write the Bright Spot Hour at Post Office Box 4, Greenville.